When a normal country is drowned in debt, the prospect of bankruptcy, hyperinflation, and economic collapse is almost inevitable. However, the United States operates under a completely different set of rules, creating one of the planet's greatest paradoxes, harboring a massive debt mountain surpassing $34 trillion while still spending leisurely and never defaulting. The secret behind this ultimate power lies in the fact that, while other nations must borrow in foreign currencies, the U.S. owes debt in the very currency it prints, the U.S. dollar, USD. When payment is due, instead of tightening its belt or trying to earn foreign exchange, the U.S. Federal Reserve, Fed, simply performs a straightforward operation of activating the money printing machine to pay the bills. However, printing money recklessly should theoretically lead to hyperinflation that devalues the currency, but the U.S. has cleverly shifted this price to the rest of the world because the USD is the dominant international reserve currency used in the majority of global trade transactions from oil and gold to basic commodities. Other nations are forced to hoard a massive amount of U.S. dollars in their foreign exchange reserves to ensure economic security. To keep that money from sitting idle, they use those very USD holdings to buy U.S. Treasury bonds. Consequently, countries holding foreign exchange reserves in dollars inadvertently become the ones bearing the brunt, sharing the inflation burden, and directly financing Washington's colossal debt tower. When the U.S. prints more money, the value of the U.S. dollar drops, meaning the reserve assets of other nations are silently eroded, while the U.S. naturally wipes out a portion of its debt's real value. By turning its domestic currency into the lifeblood flowing through the veins of the global economy, the United States has created a perfect trap. The more dependent the world is on the USD, the more the U.S. can borrow. And until the world finds a perfect alternative to the greenback, this superpower's privilege of infinite debt but never bankrupt will continue. However, will this genius stratagem of the United States truly last forever as the world begins to wake up? Washington's money-printing-to-pay debt game is pushing the global financial system into a phase of deep fracturing, sparking an undercurrent named de-dollarization. Major nations led by the BRICS bloc have realized that holding trillions of U.S. dollars in reserves is no different from voluntarily letting their economies be chained to a ghost ship called U.S. public debt. They have begun to act by reducing the greenback's share, actively diversifying into other foreign currencies, and rushing into a race to accumulate physical gold at an unprecedented record pace. It is the abuse of U.S. exorbitant privilege that is single-handedly eroding trust, the sole asset guaranteeing the value of the U.S. dollar, as the nature of this currency has long ceased to be backed by gold and relies entirely on the U.S. government's credibility. Once trust collapses and countries turn their backs simultaneously, a massive torrent of dollars circulating overseas will flood back home, creating an inflationary deluge that will consume the U.S. economy itself. The $34 trillion debt tower is no longer just Washington's private matter or a soulless statistic on an electronic board. It is the planet's largest ticking time bomb. The U.S. may not default in the conventional way by declaring it has run out of money, but it could entirely default in a more ruthless manner, paying its debts on time with completely devalued dollars, turning the hard-earned wealth of creditor nations into nothing more than scraps of paper. Facing the imminent threat of being openly bled dry of their assets, the global economic landscape is witnessing shifts of historic proportions. No longer just warnings on paper, central banks across the globe are quietly executing a pulling the firewood from under the pot campaign, reshaping the entire reserve system. They are sharply reducing their purchases of U.S. Treasury bonds while aggressively pushing for trade settlements in local currencies to sever the manipulative strings of the Washington-controlled SWIFT international payment system. This currency battle is no longer an underground confrontation, but has become a fight for survival to protect each nation's economic sovereignty against pressure from the Fed's money-printing press. This fierce resistance is placing the United States in an unprecedented historical dilemma. To retain foreign capital and curb domestic inflation, Washington is forced to maintain record-high interest rates, yet this very weapon is turning around to stab them in the back. High interest rates mean that the servicing costs for their $34 trillion debt tower are skyrocketing to trillions of dollars annually, consuming nearly the entire national budget and even surpassing defense spending. The U.S. is falling into a death spiral. The more they owe, the more money they must print. The more money they print, the higher they must raise interest rates. And the higher the interest rates go, the faster the debt burden swells at a breakneck pace. Ultimately, the world is facing a harsh truth. The price to pay for America's debt-driven prosperity will not be borne by the American people, but rather by the future of the global economy. When this debt tower becomes too heavy to stand, it will not collapse alone, but will drag the entire world financial system into an unprecedented Great Depression. The dollar's Game of Thrones may still continue thanks to U.S. military might and political influence, but trust, the sole foundation keeping this debt tower from toppling, has already developed fatal, irreparable cracks. The shaking of this foundation is pushing the world into an era of deep uncertainty, where the old rules of the Bretton Woods system are gradually losing their efficacy. Previously, the power of the dollar was backed by the hard power of the U.S. military and the petrodollar system. But now, even traditional allies in the Middle East have begun accepting oil payments in other currencies. As these monopoly pillars are broken, the world's #1 superpower is forced to face the harsh reality that they cannot forever use a virtual power to dominate the real labor value of humanity. In that context, the largest wealth transfer of the century is unfolding right before our eyes. No longer just a prediction, but transformed into a survival action for every major capital flow. The devaluation of fiat currency strongly fuels the trend of seeking new asset safe havens, ranging from traditional hard assets to the next-generation decentralized financial system. The global financial system's game of blind man's buff is reaching its final chapters, and those nations or investors who realize this truth too late will have to pay an extremely heavy price. The endgame of the $34 trillion debt tower will not happen overnight with a shocking bankruptcy announcement, but it is eating away at global stability day by day through every wave of inflation and silent exchange rate crisis. The U.S. may still be the ultimate survivor thanks to unprecedented privileges, but the greenback's monopoly status will certainly never remain intact after this debt storm passes, opening a new chapter for a more multipolar and fair financial order. This shift toward a multipolar financial order is forcing the entire global economic system to evolve and adapt to a new reality. Regional economic alliances are no longer content to sit idly by, waiting for the verdict of the Fed's interest rate hikes or cuts. They are actively building independent payment systems and developing common currencies backed by tangible assets like gold, oil, or agricultural commodities. The era where a single nation could use a political decree or the push of a money-printing button to dictate the economic destiny of the other half of the hemisphere is counting down its final days. In the eye of the storm of this great restructuring, the United States also understands that it is playing a high-stakes gamble with its own destiny. As foreign capital flows lose interest in financing Washington's debt tower, the U.S. government is left to tear itself apart in suffocating debt-ceiling battles on Capitol Hill, forced to choose between drastically cutting domestic social welfare or recklessly plunging into new monetary adventures. The nature of debt-based wealth is like a sugar-coated poison, offering instant euphoria, but the price to be paid at the end of the road is the total exhaustion of internal strength. Looking back at the whole picture, America's $34 trillion debt tower is not merely a financial crisis. It is history's most expensive lesson on the boundaries of human power and greed. No empire can maintain eternal prosperity by borrowing from the future and forcing the world to pay for its extravagance. The battle surrounding the U.S. dollar will ultimately redefine who the true master of the global economy is, the one who owns the machine that prints powerful paper bills, or the nations that hold the real labor value, resources, and actual wealth of humanity. Entering this turning point, the world is no longer just defending, but has begun witnessing direct counterattacks on the financial technology front. The decline of the U.S. debt-based monetary system is paving the way for the powerful rise of central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, and blockchain-based payment solutions. By digitizing cash flows and pegging value to real commodity baskets, nations are creating a global cross-transaction network entirely immune to sanctions or dollar devaluation, officially stripping away the ultimate weapon that Washington has used to control the world for nearly a century. This systemic collapse of trust is pushing the U.S. financial elite into a state of covert panic, forcing them to constantly seek extreme solutions to delay the day of reckoning. From attempting to instigate geopolitical conflicts to force safe haven capital to flee back to the U.S., to tightening financial regulations to halt the exodus of money, all are merely desperate efforts to prolong the lifespan of an outdated economic model. America now resembles a giant gladiator standing on feet of clay, outwardly majestic with military might and media influence, but inwardly gnawed away by the very public debt cancer they created themselves. As the velvet curtain of the dollar monopoly drama gradually closes, a new chapter of human history is opening with fairer, more transparent, and more realistic rules of the game. The U.S. $34 trillion debt tower will go down in history as a classic proof that no matter how powerful a superpower is, it cannot defeat natural economic laws and the core values of honest labor. The day the world is completely free from the greenback's restraint is no longer a distant vision, but is being shaped by every second and every minute, signaling a highly promising era of rebirth for the global economy.